The high school bullies who tormented me didn't know I was a brown belt until it was too late for them. My best friend Ian and I were eating lunch when two massive seniors decided we were sitting in their spot. The bigger one, Craig, dumped my tray over my head while his friend Jeremy laughed, saying freshmen weren't allowed in the senior section, even though there wasn't a senior section and everyone knew it. Ian tried to say we'd move, but Craig snapped his glasses in half and dropped them in his chocolate milk, asking if he could see better now. My fists were shaking under the table, but I forced them open because Sensei always said karate was only for protection, never for being pissed off. Jeremy saw my anime backpack and told the whole cafeteria we were those weird kids who run with our arms behind our backs, which we never did, but now half the cafeteria had their phones out. Craig took Ian's inhaler and pumped it empty while Ian wheezed that he actually needed it to breathe, and they just laughed harder. When they told us to show our sick anime fighting skills and we said no, Jeremy swept Ian's legs and he crashed face first, his elbow bleeding everywhere on the nasty cafeteria floor. I helped Ian up while Craig went through our phones reading our texts about Robotics Club out loud like it was the funniest thing ever. He found a photo of Ian's little sister and said she was hot, and maybe he'd find her after school, and Ian actually tried to grab his phone, but Jeremy shoved him into the wall so hard a picture frame shattered. Craig made us pick up every piece of glass with our bare hands while everyone watched, and Ian whispered, "Dude, why won't you do something? I know. You can." But I just shook my head because once I started, I didn't know if I could stop. Next day, they were waiting with zip ties and attached our backpacks backward, so we looked like idiots walking to class. Jeremy filmed it saying, "This is what happens to kids who think life is like anime where weak kids suddenly get powerful. Except in real life, weak kids just get destroyed." When teachers asked what happened, Craig stood right behind us, so we knew we had to say it was just a joke or whatever, and Mrs. Johnson definitely saw Craig's hand on my shoulder but turned away like she didn't. Craig said tomorrow they'd give us swirlies in every bathroom in school, and Jeremy said his college brother wanted to meet us, and he hazed actual adults, so imagine what he'd do to freshmen. Ian grabbed me in the locker room, practically crying, and said, "Please just fight back once, you know you could end this." But I told him fighting back when I was trained would land me in serious trouble. After school, Craig grabbed my arm saying I had spaghetti muscles and asked if I'd ever even thrown a punch, which was insane. Jeremy said they'd sign us up for the talent show to dance to K-pop in cat ears, and if we didn't, they'd break Ian's wrist so he couldn't game anymore. Every part of me wanted to drop them, and Ian kept looking at me like, please do something. I was dying inside watching him suffer because of my stupid principles. Craig took Ian's lunch money and bought himself pizza with it. When Ian's stomach growled, Jeremy punched him in the gut and Ian dropped to his knees, gasping. I had to lock every muscle in my body to stop myself from showing them what a perfectly executed roundhouse looked like. They said tomorrow they'd duct tape us to the flagpole during morning announcements, which would basically ruin our entire high school life forever, and Craig added they'd strip us to our underwear first. Then Jeremy grabbed Ian's sketchbook from his backpack and started tearing out pages of drawings he'd worked on for months. These incredible detailed mechs and characters he'd created for the comic we were making together. He held each one up before ripping it in half while Ian begged him to stop, actually begged, and Craig just laughed, saying maybe now Ian would have time to learn how to draw something that didn't suck. They made Ian eat one of the torn pieces while I stood there hating myself for not defending my best friend. We tried to leave through the side exit, but their whole football crew was there, and Craig said they'd bet on which of us would cry first. Jeremy slapped Ian's face so hard it left a handprint, then did it again when he didn't cry, and Ian was trying to cover his face, but Jeremy pinned his arms behind his back while blood dripped from his nose. Craig pulled back his fist, saying, "This is what happens when you exist in our school without permission," aiming right at Ian's already swollen eye, and Ian was sobbing, going, "Please help me," with snot and blood running down his face. That was it. Watching Craig's fist heading for Ian's already bloody face, my body moved on its own. 7 years of training taking over. Every tournament and sparring session flooding back as my weight shifted perfectly, and Craig had absolutely no idea he was about 2 seconds away from finding out what happens when you force a brown belt to fight. My hand shot up and caught Craig's fist inches from Ian's face, the impact making a sharp smack that echoed off the brick walls. Craig's eyes went huge as I twisted his wrist just enough to redirect his punch away, my feet already shifting into the stance I'd practiced thousands of times in the dojo. 7 years of muscle memory kicked in all at once. I stepped between him and Ian, keeping my knees bent and weight centered the way Sensei taught me. The whole crowd of football players went dead quiet for a second before someone yelled something about me actually doing something. Craig yanked his arm back and swung at my head with his other fist, but I saw it coming from a mile away. My left arm came up in a perfect block, catching his forearm and using his own momentum to spin him away from us. He stumbled sideways, almost losing his balance. My body wanted to follow through with the combination I'd drilled every Tuesday and Thursday for years, the one that would have put him on the ground, but I heard Sensei's voice in my head about control being the real strength. Jeremy let go of Ian's arms and came at me fast. I shifted my weight to my back foot and sidestepped his charge, sticking my leg out just enough to catch his ankle. He stumbled forward, arms windmilling to keep from falling completely, and crashed into two of his football buddies. I kept my hands open and visible, palms facing out to show I wasn't attacking. The whole area around us was frozen. Every single person had their phone out recording, and I could hear the camera clicks going off like crazy. Craig pushed himself off the wall and charged at me again, his face red and twisted up with rage. This time I was ready, grabbing his shoulder and using his forward motion to guide him past me into the brick wall behind us. I didn't shove or hit, just redirected his energy the way we practiced redirecting attacks in class. He hit the wall with his shoulder, not hard enough to really hurt, but enough to stop him. Ian scrambled behind me, blood still dripping from his nose onto his shirt, and I could hear him wheezing bad without his inhaler. Someone in the crowd yelled that a teacher was coming. I backed up slowly, keeping Craig and Jeremy in my sight while moving toward the door. My hands stayed up in a defensive position but still open. Craig and Jeremy were both breathing hard, more from shock than being tired, and I could see them trying to figure out what to do next. The crowd of football players parted as we moved backward, everyone still recording with their phones. Assistant Principal Lloyd came pushing through the crowd, her voice cutting through everything as she shouted for everyone to break it up right now. She took one look at Ian's face, all bloody and swollen, then at me standing there in my defensive stance, and her eyes got sharp as she started pulling people apart. She saw Craig's aggressive posture, how he was still balled up and ready to swing, and Jeremy's clenched fists. Officer Nixon showed up within seconds, his hand resting on his radio while he looked around at everyone. His eyes went from Ian's injuries to my face, which didn't have a mark on it, then to how I was positioned between Ian and the other two. He looked directly at Craig and Jeremy and said, "This could be considered assault." The nurse appeared and took Ian's arm, leading him away immediately while Officer Nixon pulled out his phone and started taking photos of Ian's swollen eye and bloody nose. I followed them to the health office, my legs feeling shaky now that the adrenaline was starting to fade. Everything that just happened was hitting me all at once. Ian kept looking at me while the nurse cleaned his face, and his expression was this weird mix of relief and something else I couldn't figure out. Mrs. Johnson suddenly showed up in the hallway, and Officer Nixon asked if she'd seen anything earlier. She couldn't look him in the eye when she mumbled something about not being sure what she saw. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Other kids were walking past whispering, some saying it was about time someone stood up to them, others calling me violent and saying I went too far. A P. Lloyd pulled me aside and said she had to call my parents, that I was temporarily suspended from common areas pending investigation. The words hit me like cold water dumped over my head. I'd defended my friend from getting punched in the face, and now I was the one in trouble. She dialed the number, and I heard her tell my mom there'd been an incident involving physical confrontation, and she needed to come to the school immediately. My mom's voice through the phone sounded panicked as she said she was leaving work right now. A P. Lloyd hung up and told me to wait in the conference room while they sorted everything out. Ian was still in the nurse's office getting checked over. Craig and Jeremy were being questioned by Officer Nixon, and I was sitting alone at a big table wondering how defending someone could get me suspended. The whole thing felt backwards and wrong. My hands were still shaking a little from the confrontation, not from fear, but from holding back, from not using even half of what I knew how to do. My mom arrived 20 minutes later and signed me out while AP Lloyd explained I'd be allowed back tomorrow, but had to stay out of common areas. The drive home was quiet except for my mom asking if I was hurt, and me shaking my head. She kept looking at me in the mirror but didn't push for details yet. That evening she dropped me at the dojo, and Sensei Melanie Costa was already waiting in her office. I sat on the mat and told her everything from the beginning, starting with the lunch tray and ending with Craig's fist coming at Ian's face. She nodded slowly as I talked, not interrupting even when my voice got shaky, describing Ian begging for help. When I finished, she sat forward and reminded me that self-defense means using minimum force to protect someone. She said I did exactly what I should have done, no more and no less. Then she pulled out a notebook and told me to document everything, every single incident that led to today. She helped me remember dates and details, writing down the inhaler, the glasses, the threats about Ian's sister. The list got longer than I expected when I really thought about it all. After class, I checked my phone and my stomach dropped, seeing dozens of notifications. Videos of the cafeteria incident were already everywhere online with hundreds of comments. Some people called me a hero for finally standing up to Craig and Jeremy. Others said I was a trained weapon who attacked them without warning. My hands shook reading comments about how martial arts kids are dangerous and shouldn't be allowed in regular schools. Ian texted me that the videos had over 1,000 views already. People were sharing them on every platform and adding their own opinions about who was right. Some kids from the school were defending us in the comments, explaining what Craig and Jeremy had been doing for weeks. But football team supporters were saying we started it, and I used excessive force against innocent seniors. The arguments in the comments were getting nasty with people taking sides based on the edited clips. My mom made me put my phone away and eat dinner, but I couldn't stop thinking about those videos spreading. The next morning, an email from football team parents arrived at the school calling me a trained aggressor. They demanded I be expelled for assault and said I was a liability risk because of my martial arts training. My dad printed it out and his hands were tight as he read it. He shook his head in disgust at how they twisted everything to make Craig the victim. The email claimed I attacked without provocation and used deadly force techniques against an unarmed student. They even suggested the school could be sued for allowing someone with combat training to attend. My parents started drafting their own response with actual facts about what happened. Later that morning, Counselor Glenn Robertson called Ian and me into his office to talk about everything. He had us sit in the comfortable chairs and actually listened as we explained each incident. He took detailed notes about the inhaler being emptied, the threats to Ian's sister, and the torn sketchbook. His pen never stopped moving as we described weeks of harassment and fear. For the first time, an adult seemed to really care about what we'd been through. He asked specific questions about dates and witnesses, building a complete picture of the pattern. When we mentioned Mrs. Johnson seeing but not helping, he wrote that down too. He told us he was creating a safety plan to make sure we could attend school without fear. Ian's voice cracked when he thanked him for actually believing us. After lunch, AP Lloyd called me back to her office and informed me that Craig's family had filed a formal complaint. They claimed I attacked their son unprovoked and demanded serious consequences. She kept her expression neutral, but I noticed her jaw tighten slightly when she read their version. She said we'd need to review all available evidence, including security footage and witness statements. Her tone stayed professional, but something in her eyes suggested she wasn't buying Craig's story. She asked me to write down my account of events and submit it formally by tomorrow. Meanwhile, Officer Nixon had started collecting phone videos from witnesses and creating an official chain of custody. He came to find me between classes and explained the process of preserving digital evidence. He told me privately that having multiple angles showing Craig throwing the first punch was very helpful. He reminded me that self-defense is legal, but excessive force isn't. The way he said it made me think he was on our side, but had to follow procedure. He asked for the names of anyone else who might have recorded the incident. Other kids were already coming forward with their own videos showing different angles. After school, Ian and I walked home together for the first time in weeks without looking over our shoulders. The sidewalk felt different when we weren't checking for Craig's car or Jeremy's friends. Ian was quiet for a while, then said he was glad I finally did something. But he also said he was pissed it took me so long to help him. The honesty stung, but I understood his frustration completely. We'd both suffered for weeks because I was too worried about getting in trouble. He said watching me just stand there while they hurt him made him feel abandoned. I apologized and he nodded, but things felt different between us now. That night I sat at my desk writing out a detailed timeline of everything they did. The inhaler incident, the broken glasses, the threats about his sister, every single thing. My hands shook remembering Ian begging for help while I stood there frozen by my stupid principles. The document grew to 5 pages as I remembered more details I'd tried to forget. Each incident looked worse when I wrote it down in black and white. My mom helped me organize it chronologically with dates and locations for each event. The next day, word spread that Jeremy's college brother was watching for me and planning something. Kids whispered about it in the hallways and someone warned me to watch my back. Glenn Robertson logged this threat immediately when I told him and updated our safety plan. He added escorts between classes and said teachers would be watching for any retaliation. The threat felt real, but at least adults were taking it seriously now instead of ignoring it. Other kids started coming forward with their own stories about Craig and Jeremy. AP Lloyd implemented the new safety measures, including designated routes and check-ins between classes. A teacher walked with me between every class, which felt weird, but better than constantly watching for ambushes. Other kids stared and whispered, but nobody said anything directly to me about it. That afternoon at the dojo, Sensei Melanie Costa had us pair up for de-escalation practice, where one person acted aggressive while the other stayed calm using breathing exercises and open body language. She watched me work through the drill and nodded when I kept my hands visible and my stance neutral, even when my partner got right in my face yelling about made-up problems. She called everyone to gather around and told them I'd used these exact techniques in a real situation at the school, protecting someone, then stopping the moment they were safe. The other students looked at me different after that, not like I was weak for not destroying Craig and Jeremy, but like I'd done something harder by controlling myself. Walking to my locker the next morning, I saw the duct tape before I even got close, silver strips covering the whole door with snitch written in black marker across it. I pulled out my phone and took photos from different angles, making sure the vandalism was clear, then went straight to AP Lloyd's office where she pulled up security footage on her computer. Within an hour, she'd identified 2 sophomore football players doing it after practice yesterday, their faces clear as day on the camera. She printed screenshots and added them to the growing file on her desk. Later that morning, a sophomore I recognized from the cafeteria knocked on the classroom door asking for me, and the teacher let me step into the hallway where he handed me a USB drive. He said he'd filmed the whole cafeteria thing on his phone in high resolution and already emailed it to AP Lloyd, but wanted me to have a copy too. Back in AP Lloyd's office, we watched the footage together, and you could see everything crystal clear. Craig dumping my tray, breaking Ian's glasses, Jeremy sweeping his legs, all of it happening before I ever moved to defend him. The relief hit me so hard I had to sit down, because finally there was proof that we didn't start anything. AP Lloyd spent the rest of that day creating a detailed timeline document showing every incident we'd reported, cross-referencing witness statements with security footage timestamps and adding the new video evidence. She showed me the document, which went back 3 weeks with dates, times, locations, and specific quotes from threats Craig and Jeremy had made, including the one about Ian's sister. The pattern was impossible to ignore when she laid it out like that, escalating harassment that we'd tried to report multiple times before I finally had to act. During the staff meeting that afternoon, I heard later from Glenn Robertson that Mrs. Johnson finally told the other teachers she'd seen Craig standing behind us intimidating us that day, but hadn't known how to intervene safely. She signed up for the district's bystander intervention training and agreed to write a statement about what she'd witnessed for the investigation file. It wasn't enough to fix what already happened, but at least she admitted she should have done something. Glenn Robertson called my parents that evening to discuss next steps, and they put him on speaker so I could hear him explain that the school was scheduling a restorative justice conference where everyone would sit down together. My mom's hand found my shoulder when he said Craig and Jeremy's families would be there too, and my dad asked what exactly that would accomplish. Glenn Robertson came to our house the next day with pamphlets explaining how restorative justice worked, sitting at our kitchen table drinking my mom's coffee while he broke down the process. He explained it wasn't about avoiding punishment since suspensions were already being processed, but about adding healing and accountability on top of consequences. Ian and I would get to explain the full impact of what they'd done, while Craig and Jeremy had to sit there and actually listen without interrupting or defending themselves. Then they'd have to respond and take responsibility for the harm they caused. The thought of sitting across from them made my stomach hurt, but Glenn Robertson said we'd have multiple adults there for safety and support. That night, I sat at my desk thinking about quitting robotics club because I was so tired of the attention and drama that followed me everywhere now. Ian texted me that he was thinking the same thing, that maybe we should just keep our heads down until this all blew over. The next morning, Glenn Robertson asked me to stay after our check-in and challenged me directly about giving up robotics. He said they'd already taken enough from us and asked if I really wanted to let them take the one thing Ian and I did together that made us happy. I thought about all the hours we'd spent building robots and programming them, how it was the one place where being smart and creative actually mattered. I told him I'd stay in robotics and he smiled, saying that was the right choice. After school, Ian brought over what was left of his sketchbook, and we spread the torn pages across my bedroom floor trying to match pieces together. Some drawings were completely destroyed, but others we could tape back together enough to scan them. We spent hours recreating the ones we remembered, me describing details while Ian drew, rebuilding his portfolio piece by piece. Each mech we saved felt like we were taking something back from Craig and Jeremy, proving they couldn't destroy everything that mattered to us. The next afternoon, AP Lloyd called us into the main conference room, where Glenn Robertson was already sitting with a stack of papers, and my parents were waiting in the corner chairs. They explained how restorative justice worked, that Craig and Jeremy would still face suspensions and lose their spots on the football team for the season, but this process would happen on top of those punishments to help everyone heal. My mom kept squeezing my dad's hand while AP Lloyd went through each step, explaining how we'd all sit in a circle and Craig and Jeremy would have to listen without interrupting while we explained exactly what they did to us. Glenn Robertson showed us the agreement forms that would make everything legally binding, including payment for Ian's destroyed property and medical bills, plus mandatory counseling for the bullies. My parents asked a bunch of questions about safety and AP. Lloyd promised there would be security right outside the door and strict rules about no physical contact or threats. That evening, Ian came over, and we sat at my kitchen table writing out everything we needed from them, starting with a real apology in front of witnesses, full payment for his broken glasses and torn artwork, and absolute no contact for the rest of high school. Ian's hand shook as he wrote about wanting them to admit publicly what they did, not some watered-down version where they claim it was just joking around. We made a list of every single thing they destroyed or damaged with estimated costs, and it came out to almost $800 when you were included the medical bills from the nurse treating Ian's bloody nose and scraped elbow. My dad helped us organize it into categories, while my mom made copies of everything for the official record. After 3 hours of discussion with our parents, we agreed to try the Restorative Justice Conference, but only if the school guaranteed that suspensions and athletic probation were already locked in. AP Lloyd sent an email confirming that 10-day suspensions were already processed, and both Craig and Jeremy were off the football team for the entire season, regardless of what happened in our meeting. The next morning, the athletics department started sending angry emails about playoff eligibility and how losing 2 seniors would ruin their championship chances. AP Lloyd forwarded us her response where she wrote that school policy applies equally to all students and athletic performance doesn't excuse assault and harassment. The football coach showed up at her office demanding a meeting, but she made him wait 2 hours, then gave him 5 minutes to accept the decision, or she'd recommend to the school board that he be investigated for enabling bullying. Officer Nixon got called in to brief the entire football team that afternoon about harassment laws and criminal charges. He made every player sit through his presentation about how assault charges work, how having witnesses and video makes prosecution easier, and how a criminal record follows you to college and job applications. The room stayed dead silent as he explained that anyone else who touched us would face immediate arrest. not just school discipline. Glenn Robertson met with Ian and me twice that week to practice what we'd say at the conference. He had us write out specific examples of harm without using inflammatory language, keeping everything factual and focused on impacts rather than accusations. We practiced looking at Craig and Jeremy while speaking, even though the thought made my stomach hurt. He reminded us over and over that our truth was powerful enough without needing to add drama or angry words. The night before the conference, I spent 2 hours in my room practicing the physical calming techniques from karate, keeping my hands flat on my thighs where everyone could see them, maintaining stable footing even while sitting, always knowing where the exits were in case things went bad. These habits from 7 years of training had a different purpose now, keeping me controlled in a room with the people who hurt my best friend. The morning of the conference, my parents drove me to the school early, and we met Ian and his family in the parking lot. His mom hugged me and thanked me for finally standing up for him, which made me feel worse about all the times I didn't. The conference room had chairs arranged in a circle with name cards showing where everyone would sit. A P. Lloyd started by reading the ground rules from an official district document, explaining that Craig and Jeremy had to listen without interrupting, then respond to what they heard, then participate in creating an agreement that everyone would sign. She pointed to Officer Nixon standing by the door and reminded everyone that any threats or aggressive behavior would result in immediate arrest. Craig's parents sat stiff in their chairs while Jeremy's mom kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. When AP Lloyd nodded at me to begin, I pulled out my documented list and started reading through every single thing they did to us, keeping my voice steady, even though my hands wanted to shake. I described watching Ian beg for help while Craig prepared to punch his already bloody face, how the inhaler incident could have triggered a medical emergency, how the threats about Ian's little sister made him afraid to let her walk home alone. Craig shifted in his seat and looked at his shoes while his dad's face got redder with each detail I read. Ian went next, pulling out the taped-together pieces of his artwork and spreading them on the table in the middle of our circle. His voice cracked when he explained how those drawings represented 6 months of work on our comic project, how we'd planned to submit it to a youth arts competition, how losing them felt like losing a piece of himself. He talked about the terror of hearing Jeremy's brother might come after us, how he checked over his shoulder constantly now, how he couldn't sleep the night after they threatened his sister. Jeremy actually looked down at the destroyed artwork, and his mom made a small gasping sound when she saw how much damage her son had done. The facilitator turned to Craig next and asked him to respond to what he'd heard, and Craig's jaw muscles kept twitching while he stared at the floor tiles. His dad cleared his throat loudly, and Craig finally started talking about taking Ian's inhaler, how he'd emptied it out just to mess with him, and his voice got quieter when he admitted making us pick up the broken glass with our bare hands. He wouldn't look at us, but the words came out anyway about not thinking how serious an asthma attack could be, mumbling something about not realizing Ian really needed the inhaler to breathe. Jeremy jumped in trying to explain everything away as jokes that went too far, mentioning how his older brother always pushed him around, and that's just how guys acted with each other. The facilitator stopped him and asked if his brother made him do these things, or if he chose to participate, and Jeremy's face got red while his mom watched him with her arms crossed. After a long pause, Jeremy admitted he chose to hurt us, that nobody forced him to sweep Ian's legs or pin his arms while Craig hit him, and his voice cracked when he said he knew it was wrong, but did it anyway. The room got quiet except for the sound of the facilitator writing notes on her clipboard, and I noticed Craig's mom had tears running down her face while she gripped her husband's hand. We spent the next hour going through every single incident with Craig and Jeremy, having to acknowledge each one, from the zip-tied backpacks to the threats about Ian's sister, and by the end they both looked smaller somehow, like all their power had drained away. The facilitator pulled out a typed agreement that spelled out everything they had to do, starting with written apologies that had to include specific acknowledgement of harm, full payment for Ian's destroyed artwork, and medical bills from the nurse's office, mandatory counseling sessions twice a week for 3 months, 40 hours of community service at an anti-bullying organization, and complete no-contact orders that meant they couldn't come within 50 feet of us at the school. Craig's dad asked about the football season, and AP Lloyd said athletic participation was a privilege, not a right, and both boys were on probation for the rest of the year. Jeremy's mom made him look at us while he signed the agreement, and his hand shook a little as he wrote his name on each page. Craig signed next, pressing the pen so hard it left indents on the paper underneath, while his parents signed as witnesses along with Officer Nixon and the facilitator. The whole thing took over 2 hours, and my legs were numb from sitting still so long, but watching them sign those papers knowing they'd face real consequences if they violated the agreement made everything worth it. The next morning, I was eating breakfast when my mom got an email with the official discipline letters attached, and she read them out loud while I spread peanut butter on my toast. Craig and Jeremy both got 10-day out-of-school suspension starting immediately, plus athletic probation through the end of the season, which meant they'd miss playoffs and couldn't letter in football. The letter about me was shorter, just 1 day of in-school suspension for fighting per the zero-tolerance policy, even though it was clearly self-defense, and my mom said it was ridiculous, but we both knew the school had to follow their rules. When I got to the school that Monday after my suspension, the hallways felt different somehow, like the air pressure had changed or something. Some of the football players gave me looks that could have melted steel, especially the seniors who were mad about losing their best linebacker and safety for playoffs, but they kept walking without saying anything. Other kids nodded at me or gave little half smiles, and a few freshmen actually said thanks when they passed me in the hall, though I wasn't sure what they were thanking me for exactly. The attention made my skin crawl because I just wanted things to go back to normal, but Ian said normal for us had always sucked anyway, so maybe different was better. Mrs. Johnson pulled me and Ian aside before English class and said she wanted to use our situation as a teaching moment, and we sat in the back while she led a whole discussion about bystander intervention and the importance of reporting bullying. She actually admitted to the class that she'd failed to act when she saw warning signs, looking right at us. When she said she was committed to doing better, and some kids rolled their eyes, but others were taking notes and asking real questions about what to do if they saw someone getting hurt. At lunch, Ian and I sat in our usual spot in the cafeteria, the same table where Craig had dumped my tray all those weeks ago, and nobody bothered us or told us to move. The whole myth about the senior section had been publicly destroyed during the conference when AP Lloyd stated clearly that the cafeteria had no designated sections, and now kids sat wherever they wanted, without anyone trying to claim territory. Ian actually laughed at something dumb on his phone, the first real laugh I'd heard from him in weeks, and his face didn't look scared anymore when other kids walked past our table. Later that week, I was heading to my locker when I saw some junior shoving a smaller kid against the wall, and without thinking, I stepped forward and just stood there until the junior noticed me. I told him it wasn't worth it, and he should walk away, keeping my voice calm and my hands visible at my sides like Glenn Robertson had taught me, and the junior let go of the kid and left without saying anything. The freshman grabbed his stuff and hurried away, but gave me this grateful look over his shoulder, and I realized this was what Sensei meant about using your training to protect others without violence. At Robotics Club that Thursday, Ian pulled out his notebook and showed everyone his new design, a protective robot with shields that could expand to protect someone, but had no offensive weapons at all. He explained how it was inspired by everything we'd been through, how sometimes the best defense wasn't fighting back, but creating a barrier between danger and the people you care about, and our advisor called it brilliant and said we should enter it in the state competition. We started building it together, with Ian handling the design software while I worked on the mechanical components, and other club members kept coming over to see what we were making. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. This robot that could only defend and never attack, and working on it felt like we were building something meaningful out of all the awful stuff that had happened. That weekend, Sensei Costa asked me to stay after class because she wanted to talk about something important, and she explained that she was organizing a special seminar about consent, boundaries, and what self-defense really meant. She wanted me to help teach it, to share my experience with younger students about the difference between protecting others and using martial arts for revenge or anger, and I said yes immediately because it felt like something that mattered. The seminar was the following Saturday, and about 20 kids showed up, mostly middle schoolers whose parents wanted them to learn self-defense, and I stood next to Sensei, while she explained that real strength came from knowing when not to fight. I talked about watching my friend get hurt, and how hard it was to wait for the right moment to act. How using minimum force to stop an attack was harder than just fighting back with everything you had, and several kids stayed after to thank me and ask questions about training. One girl said her older brother picked on her, and she wanted to know if she should learn karate. And I told her to talk to her parents first, but that knowing how to protect yourself was always valuable, as long as you understood the responsibility that came with it. 2 weeks passed, and AP Lloyd called us into her office to confirm everyone was following the agreement, showing us the paperwork that proved Craig and Jeremy were doing their community service hours at the food bank every Saturday and attending their weekly counseling sessions. She checked her computer screen and nodded that there hadn't been any contact violations, not even indirect messages through friends, and the safety plan was officially going back to normal, which meant no more teacher escorts between classes. Ian and I could finally walk to our lockers without looking over our shoulders every 5 seconds or checking around corners before turning them. That afternoon, we walked home together for the first time in forever, without that sick feeling in our stomachs. And Ian started laughing about how Craig had tried to claim ownership of a senior section that literally didn't exist, like he thought he could just declare part of the cafeteria his territory. We stopped at the corner store and bought sodas with our own money that nobody had stolen from us. And Ian pulled out his notebook to show me new character designs for our comic, plus this crazy robot idea with extending shields that could protect multiple people at once. The drawings were getting better than the ones Jeremy had destroyed, more detailed and with better shading, and we started planning how to build a working model for the state robotics competition coming up in 3 weeks. Every day after school, we stayed late in the robotics lab working on Ian's protective robot design, cutting metal sheets for the shields, and programming the sensors that would detect incoming objects and automatically deploy the barriers. Other kids from the club kept coming over to watch us test it, especially when the shields expanded perfectly to block projectiles we threw at the practice dummy we'd set up. The regional qualifier arrived faster than we expected, and our whole team loaded onto the bus at 5 in the morning, Ian clutching the robot wrapped in bubble wrap like it was made of glass. During our presentation, the judges kept asking questions about the inspiration, and Ian explained how it was designed to protect without causing harm, and when we demonstrated it, blocking multiple tennis balls fired from different angles, the whole audience started clapping. We won first place and qualified for state, and Craig and Jeremy were nowhere to be seen at the celebration assembly because their suspension kept them from all school events. Their football friends walked past us in the halls without saying anything, just keeping their distance like we had some invisible force field around us now. The semester wrapped up with final exams, and our grades had actually gone up since we could focus on studying instead of avoiding bathrooms and empty hallways. Ian and I both got acceptance letters to the advanced robotics program for next year, this special track where we'd work with actual engineers from the tech companies downtown. We sat in the same cafeteria spot where everything had started, eating lunch and actually talking about normal stuff like which classes to take and whether we should enter more competitions, feeling like regular high school kids for once. That's how it went down for me, but I want to know how you'd handle it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading and probably nodding along to half of them.